Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2007 horror movie titled 30 Days of Night. Now, 30 Days of Night runs for 1 hour and 54 minutes long. It is directed by David Slade. The script was done by Steve Niles, Stuart Beatty, and Brian Nelson. It is based off of the comic series 30 Days of Night by Steve Niles and Ben Templesmith. It is composed by Brian Wrightsell, the cinematography by Joe Willems, and it was edited by Art Jones. And the stars of the movie are Josh Hartnett, Melissa George, Danny Huston, Manu Bennett, Mark Boone Jr., Ben Foster, Mark Rendell, Amber Sainsbury, Megan Franich, Joel Tobeck, Elizabeth Hawthorne, Nathaniel Leese, Craig Hall, Chic Littlewood, Peter Feeney, Andrew Stehlin, John Rawls, Jared Turner, Kelson Henderson, Pua Magasiva, Grant Tilley, Rachel Maitland-Smith, Kate Elliott, and Jacob Tomuri. So what did I think of this movie? At least I'm going to say one thing right off the top. This movie was really, really excellent. I mean, I am just glad that I got a chance to see vampires the way vampires are supposed to be made. Cold-hearted, calculated, heartless, vicious, albeit somewhat semi-primal creatures. Instead of trying to humanize them, make them into sophisticated, romanticized, or try to make them seem like more human than creature. No, these vampires are feral. Their strategies are cerebral. Sure, they still seem to be somewhat intelligent in terms of cognitive skills, although their communication makes you probably think that they're primal. Their motives might seem to appear primal. Their language might also seem to appear primal, but they're still strong in terms of cognitive, intelligent, and resourceful. They know how to get their prey. These predators know how to kill their prey, and let's just face it, this movie does indeed have a very massive kill count. So we start off with a skinny, unknown, nameless individual who is simply just known as the Stranger, played by Ben Foster, warns us that the cold atmosphere isn't coming just from the frozen town of Barrow, Alaska, the most northernest town in the United States, but something far more sinister is vastly approaching, and that no one is safe. Unless you practically get the hell out of town. Unless you get the hell out of Barrow, you are just totally fucked over. Yes, that's right. And that's exactly what happens to a lot of the residents in the town of Barrow. Very few people actually even survive in this movie, be it human being or vampire. The town of Barrow is, like I said, the most northernmost town in America, and also around the coldest time of the year, where sunlight is completely absent for 30 days. I think they said anytime between November 18th till December 17th, it's going to be completely pitch black. The worst thing also, too, is that there isn't any kind of, like, communication to get us out of the town. There's no way that they could call, like, National Guards or the Air Force or any other kind of military organization to get them out. No, because apparently the stranger burned all their cell phones, burned all their communication systems, burned down their plane. Hell, they even killed off John Reese's kennel of sled dogs. So there's really no escaping this town. So if you're still in Barrow, Alaska, let's just face it, you're completely fucked. I'm sorry I can't use any better words to describe this, but you're pretty much going to be pretty much chow to the vampires. Therefore, those who reside in the area will be living in complete darkness, but that will not be the only thing they're going to have to deal with. So what do these residents have to deal with besides the frigid weather and 1 month of complete darkness? Well, since the black skies will be upon them, what an opportunity for blood-sucking vampires who operate better at night to take advantage of the vulnerable residents in their always hungry appetite for flesh and blood. And besides that, now that there's going to be 30 days of complete darkness, these vampires are pretty much have a big party for them. Plenty of fresh meat to eat, plenty of blood to consume that could take them, that could last them 30 days. And the best part about it is there's no sunlight to distract their mission. They're going to eat, sleep, eat, repeat, conquer for the next 30 days at least. So they definitely have the advantage, definitely in their favor against the humans. So these feral creatures have traveled long miles because, in the opening scenes you see, aside from the burned cell phones, you see a big ship parked there that wasn't there before. Eben Olsen, played by Josh Hartnett, and his sidekick Billy Kitcow, played by Manu Bennett, look on and see like an abandoned ship, but it was never there before. Who's on it? Where did it come from? Well, I guess it's probably my assumption that it was the vampires that were on that ship. And of course, they're hungry, and sure, they probably would have been at an advantage if they would have went to a more populated city in Alaska. But since Barrow has maybe a small population, at least they're not going to be disturbed by any types of means of sunlight. Where do they actually come from, actually? My guess would probably be like, I'm thinking somewhere along the terms of probably Eastern European, like maybe like frozen places like Siberia. Maybe something like around the Iron Curtain. I'm not sure if it's necessarily Transylvania because, obviously they're not speaking in any kind of Romanian accent, like, there is no Boone to suck your blood. No. These feral creatures, tend to have long, pointy claws, big, jaggedy, sharp teeth. And, they're actually treated more closer with more primal instinct than rather, seduction. And sure, there's more people that reside in Anchorage or Fairbanks, but these vampires' weaknesses is sunlight, and any close contact with light will likely kill them. That's why a brightless town like Barrow is the perfect destination for their carnage. In a standard condition of traditional creature features, they follow a certain pattern that has kind of a ritualistic pattern they methodically utilize before they reveal themselves to the camera. After they whisk at rapid speed, and when you least expect it, they do the heart-pounding jump scare when you least expect it. It works all the time. It never fails. These vampires are a desperate group of obsessive outcasts. They will attack when you least expect, because it just makes things interesting, and I guess the smell of fear and the taste of fear makes our flesh and our blood taste all the more tenderly good. At least with the classic Count Dracula, it actually serves some form of purpose, and he did his dastardly deeds with style and sophistication, albeit using more seductive tactics to get his prey. These feral creatures are fixated on their next meal. They also seem to speak a language of their own that can only be that only they can understand and no one else can. And even the sounds sound a bit superficial and incoherent. But according to the comic books, the vampires actually do speak properly. They actually do know how to communicate with each other, and they also utilize a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor in the comic books. But in the movie, they're definitely more primal, more animalistic, and more feral than in the comics. There is no Count Dracula with the sophistication and the romanticism and the more subtle approach to his attack. There is no, oh thank fucking God, there is no Twilight where the vampires are just whiny emo bitches who glitter instead of evaporate. And okay, maybe there is no wooden cross or wooden stake or holy cross or holy water that is used in this movie to defeat the vampires. But, they just use practical things. I mean, they either, chop their heads off with an axe. They use shotguns. I believe, what's his name? Bo. He uses his big-ass heavy machinery type of giant saw that impaled a few of these creatures. He was actually doing quite well. He was at one time quite kick-ass, maybe even doing more so than our beloved sheriff. But, they don't use any of these kind of, they don't use any of that shit. They just use standard weaponry to defeat the vampires. But the vampires are also quite unpredictable. They also do their fair share of killing. There is no happy ending. Even the protagonist does something like a sacrificial killing does sort of like a sacrifices his own self just to defeat the vampires. Or at least defeat the leader. What's even sad about their somewhat weird language is that they have to depend on subtitles to translate what they're saying, making it look goofy for a film that totally does not depend heavily on satire or dark comedy. And I'm glad that kind of like this movie does not go into that kind of direction. Granted, in the never-ending barrage of vampire movies out there globally, director David Slade's 30 Days of Night is actually one of the more better vampire movies out there. Albeit following the traditional path of having a macho leader leading a band of cohorts who go into retreat while the creatures do their evil and find the right moment to retaliate. I mean, sure, most of this movie is about survival and to do whatever means necessary so that you don't end up becoming vampire chow. Josh Hartnett stars as the town's sheriff, Eben Olsen, who joins forces with his estranged wife, Stella, played by Melissa George, and his deputy, Billy Kitka, played by Manu Bennett, who remains stuck in the town because apparently planes it can't land in Barrow at night. And also because of all communication systems have been completely desecrated. So most of the survivors in this town, or people who are making the effort to survive, have no place else to go. Because all their communications, everything had been destroyed by these fucking vampires. So they're pretty much stuck in this little hellhole of a town. And it's one of those, it's either us or them situations. And yeah, of course, it will come as no surprise that not a lot of people are going to come out alive. Like I said, even our protagonist dies in this movie. And those who have survived must take refuge in an attic. But they can't stay in that attic forever. I mean, sooner or later, the isolation, get it? Isolation, because they're in Barrow, Alaska. I made an unintended joke. Anyhow, the isolation, just by staying secluded in an attic to retreat, isn't always the greatest idea. I mean, it might work for a couple of days, but after a while, you have to come out. Food supply is going to become scarce. So then they have to kind of like pillage a supermarket. Some people might get tired and restless of hiding and want to go out and kick some fucking vampire ass. Even though they're not necessarily going to come out on top. But at least they'll make the effort to die trying. And, you know, that's kind of like what happens. I mean, it's kind of so relieving that a cantankerous geriatric is destined to make a run for it, because now he can, under layers of heavy snow. The vampires seem to be immune to frozen conditions. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily naked, but they're not exactly wearing the warmest clothes out there in the frozen snow. Even though the movie was actually filmed not in Barrow, Alaska, but it was actually filmed in New Zealand. Now, the question I have often asked is, does it actually snow there in New Zealand? Maybe it does, but maybe it doesn't look like a big frozen tundra. But it was very convincing. And I think according to the technical production team, they actually used actual real snow to surround the small town setting. So there is a chance you could probably get something like hypothermia from this real snow. It's kind of a surprise how a lot of characters didn't suffer from anything that could possibly get them sick, like pneumonia or influenza, because if you get those, you could get those from being outside in the cold for a long period of time. According to sources, Josh Hartnett, during the filming of this movie, actually really got sick. And so, yeah, this really does, have a bit of something that, I don't envy him. I don't really actually envy any of the other cast members. Yeah. When it comes to terms of representation in this movie, I've noticed, even though I know that the movie was set in New Zealand and not actually in an Alaskan town, but I was thinking, why didn't they cast any Inuit representation? Because the two main characters of Eben and Stella, they were supposed to be Inuit. But then through whitewashing, they would be eventually replaced by Josh Hartnett and Melissa George, who are practically white toast. I know I hate to use race politics in there, but yeah. That's one thing I've also kind of seemed to have noticed. The town of Barrow is actually quite interesting in a rather puzzling way. You see, the town itself seems close-knit, but like society itself, humans will only care for others when they feel danger upon them, and even their way of looking out for each other is actually quite suspicious. Yes, in the world that we live in, we only seem to look after and care for each other in times of danger. Other than that, if we go about and live our own ways, nobody will really give a fuck about us. It's only when shit is thrown at us in a big way, then they all care. But other than that, if you go about your own way, nobody will give a fuck if you're alive or dead. Sad but true. They never mention any kind of escape route or calling any military or National Guard to save them, but then again, what could they have done? They have no means of communication. Everything has been desecrated. It seems that they just have to settle in the town willfully, though at least they sell stuff for each other. Though this movie definitely has its flaws and cliches, it's still a great deal of provocative traits that are quite compelling. Being that the setting of the movie is in the town of Barrow, Alaska, the film was actually shot in New Zealand, where it doesn't snow to large extremities like Alaska. Under the cinematography of Joe Willems, the location shots are purely sublime. It makes you feel like you're in a small, isolated community where there's very few houses around, very few stores, and it seems like everybody seems to know everyone. David Slade, who previously directed the really good Hard Candy movie, had a firm grip of how this movie was filmed. The strange thing about this movie is that it lacked the logic that the vampires destroyed all the generators that could leave all the remaining civilians in their homes in the dark. How come no one dies from hypothermia? They should get mauled and annihilated by the vampires, but nobody freezes to death. Also, how come you don't see their breath? You know, when you're outside in the frozen cold, like if it's 25 degrees below zero, and you're walking out without a scarf, and you're breathing, you actually see like white steam coming out of your mouth. How come nobody has white steam coming out of their mouths? Alright, okay, I know it's fiction, and I should suspend my disbelief, but still, if the vampires won't get you, the frigid weather is also not very compromising. So why isn't anybody out there lying on the ground like frozen meat? So for those who haven't seen enough vampire movies, I still say it's a good watch, being that it captures the original lore of vampires as they are seen for their carnal instincts and aren't seductive night stalkers or whiny glittery goths. Right, Edward Cullen? They are not to be glorified or admired. They are meant to be feared and hostile. Well, at least it debunks the myth about the stuff we learned from vampire movies. There's no Count Dracula bullshit. There's no Edward Cullen glittery, emo, whining, manic, depressive, moody asinines like you get from the Twilight movies. No. These vampires are animals. They're beasts. They're feral. And I couldn't like them any other way. Pretty much almost like the Buffy the Vampire Slayer types, which I actually always find to be very provocative and entertaining. I like vampires that are entertaining. I like them as villains. Let's put it that way. They're like they're supposed to be. They're monsters. They're not to be admired. They're not to be adulated. They're not to be sophisticated. No. They're vicious. They're cerebral. And they're supposed to actually scare the shit out of you. Okay? So Stephanie Meyer with your emo Edward Cullen type, you could take your Twilight vampires and you could just shove it up your asses. I want my vampires to be scary, not seductive or whiny. I mean, I'm not saying this movie was any way, shape, or form perfect in any way. It was cliche. It was formulaic. There really wasn't much of a plot. I mean, I'm probably maybe expecting too much. But at least it's something good to, watch during the Halloween season. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I chose this movie, 30 Days of Night. I mean, they requested me that they wanted me to do something horror because it's that perfect time of the year to do something within the realms of the horror film genre. So I thought, hey, let's do 30 Days of Night. But still, with its weaknesses and its flaws, I can't give it too much of a high mark. But if I was to give this a scale out of 10, I would give 30 Days of Night a 6 out of 10. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening to my YouTube channel. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. and I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Karate Rider saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.